thanks to everybody here for coming together to talk about some really interesting issues. I know I just learned a lot. It's really hard to follow Richard Reeves. I don't quite have the same slides and pictures and images and stories, but I think it really sets the tone for this conversation perfectly. I have the challenge and the honor of moderating this first panel where we're going to be talking about opportunity and inequality. And you know, these words mean different things to different people, and I've seen it in my conversations with individuals and families, as well as the non-for-profits that we work with. My practice, I have the privilege of overseeing the southeastern region for U.S. Trust, and as you know, we are the wealth management arm for Bank of America. We work with individuals and families. We help them just to think about their impact and actually see it happen in the community. And we work with non-for-profits, and we help to think about how can we really drive meaningful solutions to the problems that are really vexing our communities. So, you know, about a year ago, I was talking with Eileen. I had the chance to meet her and Pat Matthews, a lot of other leaders here in Virginia. And we started talking about this idea, there's this tale of two Virginias. What we just learned from the opportunity research from Richard Reeves. If you look at any state, any city really, you just see there's the two communities. And there's a clear line that's really driven by income, by inequality, by lack of opportunity, and you see the outcomes in health, you see them in education statistics and workforce and housing. And so we really thought, what can we do here? What can philanthropy do? And that quickly expanded to what can philanthropy, public officials, business community, private sector partners, what can we all do collectively to really make a dent? So we're going to talk about that actually here, and I'm so delighted to have three amazing leaders, regional leaders here, representing philanthropy, education, and workforce development. Tamara Copeland, she's the president of the Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers. Dr. Bruce McDade, the superintendent for Manassas Park Public Schools, and David Hunn, who is the president and CEO of SkillSource Group. Before we go into the panel conversation, actually, I do have some trivia questions for everybody. So does everybody have their devices, our little clickers? No prize, except for bragging rights. But wanted to pick out some of the statistics from the opportunity research that really will illustrate what we're talking about today. So here, first question. Oh boy, this is fun. Of the 2.4 million residents in Northern Virginia, how many of them do you think live below the poverty level? Go ahead and take your clickers out. I'll get the cue when it's ready. Okay, good. Okay. How about that? So, over half the respondents here actually have the correct answer. We have 376,000 residents here living in poverty. It's an astonishing number. Next question. Okay, less than a high school diploma. How many of our citizens in Northern Virginia have less than a high school diploma? Okay, any minute. Interesting, okay. So, the correct answer is B. 118,000 residents lack a high school diploma. Another interesting statistic, I think 2/3 of the jobs today require some kind of post-secondary degree. So these are big numbers, and I think that they really give us concrete figures about opportunity and inequality that we're going to talk about now with the panel. So I'm going to head over here. We're going to save some time for the end for some questions. But we're going to open it up actually with a conversation representing, so we're representing philanthropy, Tamara, Bruce, education, and David with workforce and skills training. Sorry, there's a little bit of an echo. Can you just start this conversation here? From each of your vantage points, what does opportunity and inequality mean to you in your work? And Tamara, I'm going to ask you to start from the role of philanthropy.
Well, thank you, Erin. You know, I love the focus on opportunity and equality. And when I was asked to address that question, I thought, well, let's just start with the dictionary. And the dictionary says opportunity is a set of circumstances that makes it possible to do something. A set of circumstances that makes it possible to do something. And I thought, well, that definition works for me. And so I started thinking back about what are the opportunities that exist. And I think that when you disaggregate your data, and I'm ecstatic about the data that's presented through the Opportunity Index, so thank you for that. But when that information is disaggregated by race and ethnicity in particular, you get a different kind of picture of what the reality is. So there are people across this region, and certainly across the country, for whom there have been decades, if not centuries, when they were not afforded the opportunities. And if you just look at the data without looking back, without doing that back mapping and trying to figure out why, that you end up thinking that there's something wrong with those people. And so you buy into the stereotypes that have been perpetuated through the media, as opposed to thinking and recognizing that they really didn't have the opportunity. And we end up focusing our discussions and our interventions more on blaming the victims to a certain degree, as opposed to looking at the foundations that have created that lack of opportunity. So just one more word about equality. And so when we think about equality, I wonder how many people have seen that great graphic with the kids looking over the fence at the baseball game? Do y'all know what I'm talking about? So I think that it is the most powerful image to present the distinction between equality and equity. So these kids are of different heights. For those of you who haven't seen it, the kids are of different heights. They're trying to peer over the fence to look at a baseball game, and they all have the same level crate to look over the fence. Well, they can't do it. Some of them are taller, middle. They can't see. So that's equality. They all have the same crate size. The crates have the same height. So if we recognize where we are on the kind of continuum of opportunity, that it's not about presenting equal access. For some, there needs to be more access. There needs to be a different entry point for opportunity if we really want to reach what I think we want to reach, which is equity and not necessarily equality. So, thank you.
Bruce.
Good morning, everyone. Opportunity abounds in Manassas Park City Schools. When you're the superintendent of the second smallest school division in Northern Virginia, you as the superintendent can go out at 3 o'clock in the morning to drive around with the transportation folks to see if it's going to be fit to open school that day. I also do bus duty on Friday afternoon. I think that's really important to be out there, to be with the kids, and it's a ritual that I have. It's also a good way to connect with the teachers as well. So those kids expect me on Friday afternoon. Being in a small school system also provides me the opportunity to serve in many capacities. I'm also the PIO in our school system. I am the Director of Public Relations. So if you'll just indulge me for a moment. Because if I don't put this on the website, it won't get up there. I also make a little video in the morning explaining to everyone why we delayed school 2 hours. I just did it on a whim last week. Who knew it'd be such a big hit? In small little Manassas Park, we had over 600 views at 4:20 in the morning. So it's a great strategy to explain to our constituents why we closed school. Being in Manassas Park is special. Manassas Park is a city of 2.5 square miles. We have a base of 16,000 people, and 3,500 of those kids come into our school division every single day. 65% of our kids are on free and reduced price lunch. It's been a sea change in our city. I came in 2001 as principal of that high school when the only diversity that we had back then in 2001 were 2 tables, lunch tables, during our 2 lunches. First lunch, we had a table of Latino kids. 45 minutes later, second lunch came in. Interestingly, using the same table, another group of Latino kids came in. That was it in 2001. What a sea change today in 2017. We are 60% Hispanic, and half of our kids receive ESOL services every single day. So our challenge is steep, but we rise to the challenge, and it's just a lot of fun. So what opportunities can we provide our kids in Manassas Park with a 65% free and reduced price lunch? Opportunity is ensuring that every child in grades 3 through 12, every child, regardless of background, income, or any of those factors, receives a device. And if they can't afford the technology fee, we certainly will take care of that for them. That's equality. Every child has a device. Every child in our school system, if they want to be exposed to the most rigorous curriculum we can offer, they have access. We do not have prerequisites. There doesn't have to be a GPA prior to taking the class. If a student wants to take an AP class or any honors class in Manassas Park City Schools, they certainly can try. The door is open. And the third example would be this. We have wraparound services in Manassas Park that all students, that all families have access to, and perhaps I'll touch upon that in just a moment. We have a family market with the help of the foundation here. Every month we serve over 500 families. They don't have to fill out applications, they just have to show up. We have a Nourishing Ninjas program where we deliver food to students every Friday afternoon. So that's opportunity. We don't ask for any paperwork. If those children and families want to come, they certainly can take advantage of it. Those are some opportunities that we offer in Manassas Park, and I'll touch upon some of those further along.
Good morning. In my world, the workforce world, it doesn't get any better than working with the opportunities in Northern Virginia. As I sit and talk with you today, we're looking at an unemployment rate of 2.7%, probably lower in certain parts of the region, but there is a lot of opportunity that is generally going to be determined by educational attainment and your ability to work within a very sophisticated labor market. So much of the data that was shared is so compelling when you look at the numbers, Aaron's most recent data of the numbers of adults without a high school degree or any education beyond that. I use the term that you can fill Jack Kent Cooke Stadium up with the numbers of people in Northern Virginia. It's a lot of impact on individuals and on families. The Workforce Board, led by a private sector board of directors, Todd Rowley's in our audience with United Bank, and SkillSource Group, of course, the nonprofit arm of that, led by Kim Clark-Pastis, also in the audience. We work with our state and local partners to run literally bricks and mortar job centers around Northern Virginia. Several in Fairfax, several in Prince William County, along with Loudoun County. We have job seekers coming in, employers coming in. Our goal as a public service is to bring the two together. In the unemployment areas of 2.7%, it's still amazing that we're on track to have close to 50,000 visits during the course of this year. It's very similar to where we were last year. If we were talking 6 years ago during the recession, it would have been double that. So I would suggest, particularly for the public officials in the room, there is tremendous demand for the services of workforce development, whether it's at the community college or at the centers that we're able to provide services. It's to assist someone to how to look for work in a sophisticated labor market? What are the skills that you will need to move into jobs that will support you and your family? It might not require a 4-year degree, but it's almost certainly going to require education and certifications beyond high school. I would like to think that the workforce world is opening up opportunity, Aaron, in terms of for those that are able to find their way to our centers.
Thank you. So Tamara, can you touch upon the comment that you made in your opening remarks about the history of inequality and lack of opportunity? Because I do think it's an important notion to understand the frame that you mentioned, blaming the individual without necessarily understanding the context and the systems that surround that individual.
Well, let's just start with redlining. So I suspect that most of you realize that there was a system in place in our country whereby the federal government, with great intentionality, literally drew red lines on city maps to define where home loans could be acquired and where they could not be. And typically, those red lines also divided communities by race. So when you have Black families, in particular at this point in time in our country, when this was happening, who did not have the ability to get a loan to purchase a home. So it presents this sense that people wanted to live together. They wanted to live in racial enclaves. That was not necessarily true. It created a sense that people did not want to live in the suburbs. They didn't have an opportunity to live in the suburbs. And it created the basis of a racial wealth gap that continues today. So when you look at how most people in this country acquire wealth, and wealth with a small w, not the capital W, but the small w, that it's typically through home ownership. So when your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents had the ability to own homes, they also had the ability to borrow against them so that people could go to college. They had the ability to borrow when they needed to make home repairs. They had financial wealth. So just the way that we think about the reality in the world today, that we have to be aware of history and to look at how we got to where we are. And just on the topic of redlining, Aaron, I would commend to you a book called The Color of Law. The Color of Law is written by Richard Rothstein. He's with the Economic Policy Institute. And he does, I think, a phenomenal job of making information incredibly accessible. I think most people within the philanthropic community, in our local philanthropic community, have read that book now, just to become more and more aware of, in just one small area, I'm just talking housing, we aren't talking education and workforce in the other areas, but just in housing, just to get a sense of how we got to where we are.
Can I just ask you to continue on that, because you've done something pretty innovative within your own network of philanthropic leaders, foundations, funders, and it's called Putting Racism on the Table. Can you talk about that for a few minutes and why you decided to do that and what's the impact been like?
So actually, I can talk about that for 2 weeks, but I'll try to be brief. So I work with the local philanthropic community, foundations and corporate giving programs in Northern Virginia, suburban Maryland, and the District of Columbia. And as many of you will recall, a few years ago, there was a tragic incident in Baltimore where a man was arrested. His name was Freddie Gray. He was put in the back of a police van, and somehow, during the course of being transported to the police department, he suffered injuries and subsequently died a few days later. And this was on the heels of a number of cell phone videos. When Bruce brought out his cell phone, a lot of people had brought out cell phones and had captured incidents of police violence against, particularly against Black men. So when Freddie Gray died, the philanthropic community came together and they said, well, can that happen here? Well, of course it can. Well, what should we do to prevent it from happening? And so people talked about those kinds of interventions that you would imagine. They were going to put more money into education, more money into workforce, which are the number 1 and 2 areas in which philanthropy in our region and probably across the country invest: education and workforce and health. So they were talking about all of the interventions that are kind of same old, same old. And someone said, well, let's look at the threads. Let's look at what's undergirding this. And there was a realization that there was an issue of race. And we felt that perhaps we had had the Bull Connor moment. And for those of you who aren't old enough to remember, it's a civil rights moment where the dogs and the water hoses were captured on television and still photographs of what was happening to unarmed teenagers and protesters, particularly in the South. So the cell phone videos, many people thought may have been kind of that Bull Connor moment. Bull Connor was the chief of police. But anyway, so what we recognized was there was a moment in time where we had the opportunity to delve deeper into a topic, not to look at the presenting situation, but what created the presenting situation. And we thought that it wasn't personal animus. It wasn't the way that we typically define racism, but it was structural racism or systemic racism along with implicit bias. And the philanthropic community decided that they wanted to learn more about that. And they undertook what I think was pretty phenomenal, a 6-month learning journey where over the course of 6 months, they devoted 3 hours once a month to exploring in depth some aspect of structural racism, systemic racism, and implicit bias. And because of that, I think that there is a recognition of how the disparate treatment of people undergirds presenting problems. And if we only address that presenting problem, we will continue to have the kind of statistics that we saw up here and are in the opportunity index, that we truly have to delve deeper. So the putting racism on the table was truly to look at what is the undergirding reality, the Richard Rothstein stories of the world, the redlining stories that have presented the problem. Because if we don't, in some instances, dismantle the systems, we can't tinker around the edges. It's going to still be there. We have to have that level of recognition of the problem that we really want to address change.
That was impressive in 5 minutes, a very complex subject. But I think it is important. We do, as a society, tend to place a greater emphasis on the individual versus the systems, and in many cases, philanthropy has been putting significant resources against these challenges, and yet, on the whole, seeing them get worse in some cases. And I think getting deeper into that conversation is really interesting. David, can you actually take a couple of minutes to talk about a relatively new, I would say, concept, if you will, here regionally, but also in other parts of the country, that gets underneath these issues? I'm speaking about community wealth building, and particularly how it really engages those individuals that are typically, with that bottom level on Richard's chart.
Thank you, Erin. So starting last fall at the Community Foundation's leadership and their request, I had an opportunity to work in a pro bono effort to assess really the opportunity for implementing a community wealth building effort here locally in Northern Virginia. And if, for those of you not familiar with community wealth building, it really emphasizes creating opportunities for low-income adults and families to build up assets and ownership over time so that the benefits of the economic activity remains local. So much of our economic development efforts that are funded at the state and local level are intended to bring industries and companies from outside in. And that's a great thing, and that's why we're in this beautiful facility today. But I would suggest, and many of the academicians behind community wealth building really want to see, how do you grow from within? How do you strengthen underutilized local assets to make a community more vibrant? and it's about developing assets so that the wealth stays local. So we've worked, a team of us here, in fact, let me stop. I think a number of you are in the room. Would you raise your hand if you were part of this local effort? For those of you who are interested in learning more, please reach out to someone who's raised their hand because there's going to be an ongoing effort. We're referring to this as stage one. But during stage one, we thought the greatest impact was in looking at building assets for existing career pathways for youth and young adults. And again, in my world, we look at a young adult from 17 to 24. It's just that area of maturation and continued independence. And we wanted to really see how to examine how to better coordinate the efforts of employers, public sector, and nonprofit sector that would work with less skilled and lower income adults throughout our region. So our next steps will be, sorry for the background noise, we'll be continuing to work with employers such as many of you who are interested in hiring and retaining younger workers. All of us in this room have to make sure that the public employment programs that myself and my colleagues oversee, that we're producing the workers that have the qualifications that are needed by employers. Bottom line, educational attainment, credential attainment, work experience. But we must also hear from employers about the issues that are impacting the young workers' success on the job. We welcome the opportunity to speak with employers to really offer asset-building growth strategies that will grow and retain talent in the region. So it's a bottom-up approach, Aaron. It's not going to happen overnight, but clearly I think the ground is ripe.
So we talked a bit about education, or education is one of the structural supports, really the core of what communities can be doing to help move the needle on economic mobility. Bruce, you sit in a really interesting role within your school system, and certainly the demographic changes you just mentioned have really changed what education is today. And just for everybody's clarification, what does poverty look like in your classroom? What does it actually do to a child and his or her ability to learn? And what does it mean for you and your staff and your teachers?
Well, again, getting back a little bit to the context, we often get overlooked in Manassas Park because we're surrounded by the behemoths, Fairfax County, 187,000 students, Prince William County, which surrounds us almost in its entirety. Loudoun County is to the north. The city of Manassas is next door. So we're this little jewel right in the center of it all. And we're nimble, and we can do some things. And that's the exciting part about these initiatives that I highlighted, the one-to-one initiative, the open enrollment, the wraparound services. We can make things happen very quickly, and that will be my closing pitch to all of you before I leave. I've brought lots of cards with me here. But our goal would be, in this small little school system, these 4 buildings, 3,500 kids, knowing we have such a high poverty rate. We are #1 in the state in terms of serving students for ESOL services. Again, 50% of our kids receiving services on a daily basis. Our hope would be that poverty would be invisible. If every student has a device issued by the school system, the goal is to be certain that all those devices are the same. For example, some of our more well-to-do families came to us when we rolled out the one-to-one initiative, which we affectionately call MPCS Connects, now in its 3rd year. Their goal was to say to us, my child doesn't need that device. My child doesn't need a Chromebook. My child has this device, which is completely fine. In fact, it's so much better than a Chromebook. And our answer was a resounding no. We're going to level the playing field. Everybody is going to be using the same device. So in that respect, we would hope that with that level playing field, the equality piece of this, that poverty would be invisible. But we know it's not. We have kids coming to school in the middle of winter on those days when I don't close school. Bad guy, right? Not dressed appropriately. No winter coats, some of them in shorts. It's very, very sad to see. So it's not invisible. We have kids coming to school homeless. We have kids coming to school who are hungry. Hence the need for these wraparound services like the Family Market and the Nourishing Ninjas program, which, by the way, one of our snow days happened to be on that Friday. It was the first Friday in January. Do you remember many schools closed because of not bad weather, not excessive snow, but because it was cold? And every time we close school due to inclement weather, I worry about 2,000 mini cougars not getting 2 meals a day. That's the reality. So what we did, those Nourishing Ninjas, we got together, we took those bags, we filled up our vans, and we went out into the community. And we delivered those packages to the kids. Otherwise, they wouldn't have anything for the weekend, in all likelihood. That's what poverty looks like. And when you knock on the door, and those kids come to the door, they're very happy to see you. But there it is right there as well. So our goal is when they're ours during the school day, we're going to be certain that poverty is invisible, knowing that is not. This requires a different kind of teacher. When we go out and recruit, and tomorrow actually happens to be our first recruiting trip, I'm down at UVA tomorrow, the type of teacher that I'm looking for, that I'll be trying to pluck out of the audience tomorrow down in Newcomb Hall, is going to be that educator who is not only concerned with academic success within the classroom. I'm looking for that educator, that millennial who wants to make a difference, who wants to feel valued, make an impact. And that's what millennials want. And Manassas Park, we can offer that.
You know, I want to pick up on that. Actually, I was interviewing somebody who was quite a colorful character talking about education. And he said, you know what I learned about improving or looking at the teaching issue when it comes to reducing inequality and promoting opportunity is in some schools, there are good teachers, but in some schools you need like the Navy SEALs of teachers. And I think that that's what we see when you're dealing with these sorts of numbers and the types of issues that come to the classroom. Can I just ask everybody here to take a step back and think about this, is extending your work into the community. So when students go home, what's happening with the school system? How are you engaging those families? Tamara, David, what you are seeing from both your vantage points in terms of really meaningfully supporting families and communities. What are some of the more innovative things that you're seeing, here, or in other parts of the country that you'd like to see here? Tamara, do you want to?
So one of the things, just to stay on housing for a minute, we all recognize, and particularly in this room, the lack of affordable housing in our region. And there just isn't any question about it. And the number of families who are homeless. So when we started thinking about that in the philanthropic community, we weren't exactly sure how to enter that space, what we could do. And it's a very complicated financing mechanisms, et cetera, and we weren't sure what the role of philanthropy might be. And so we partnered with an organization called Enterprise Community Loan Fund, and they provide loans to developers to create housing units. And we set up what's called a note, a financial tool, called Our Region, Your Investment. And it's so that philanthropic institutions can put money into this note. It does not affect their giving. So if you're an arts funder or a workforce funder or an education funder, you are still doing that. This is not a grant. This is how you invest the corpus of your funds, so that you invest in a vehicle that not only earns you money, it's a guaranteed rate of return, but it also does good in the community. So this is important, I think, because Our Region, Your Investment, is, as the note is called, and those in the room who are looking for an investment, this is a great one. There's a $5,000 floor. You have to invest $5,000, but so could your your school, your church or synagogue, whatever, any group that you're a part of could make an investment. And so far, the philanthropic community now has put in, we started out with a $5 million goal. We now have, I think, close to $13 million in the fund. We have five housing initiatives underway, 3 in the district, one in Fairfax County and one in Prince George's County, and more, and there are others in the pipeline. But even as, and I'm very proud of this, I think that it's a very tangible way in which philanthropy writ large as a community has engaged in addressing a community problem. But it's all about apartments. It's all about rental units. We still aren't creating wealth. We are creating housing, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But what we're looking at now is what is the way that we can start creating homes that can be purchased. Citibank has an interesting initiative in New York City that's based on land trust, and I am in the very early stages of learning about land trust, so I don't want to reflect how ignorant I am about it. But what I do know is that if you can create a partnership with government in New York City in which land is set aside in New York to build homes that can be purchased, and not only can those homes be purchased by people at a lower income, they can also sell them. So it's not that they can only purchase them, it's a way for them to build wealth. So I'm making up these numbers, but if they are selling them and they're making a profit of $40,000, they don't get to keep the whole 40, let's say they get to keep 20, and 20 goes back into the initiative. But nonetheless, it's a way to start building wealth. And so we're trying to learn more about how New York City and Citibank really created that partnership so that we can look at how we create homes that can be purchased in our region.
David, you look like you have something you want to say. I was going to point to you to follow up on that. Please.
May I follow up? So let's stay on the theme of great practices or innovative practices. I think that's where you wanted us to go. And I'll speak on the workforce side. And I really would like to highlight, going back to some of the data that Michael showed us, his numbers suggested about 16,000 young adults, 16 to 24, in our 3-county area were neither working nor in school. And that window is what I want to spend my time on. So the barriers that we would see typically, what's happening with those young people? Well, typically they might be having reading, math, or language arts challenges that they're probably at a 9th grade or below level, even if they're high school graduates. They could have some engagement in the justice system, either as a juvenile or as an adult. They could be, at that young age, be a mom or a dad. Or they might even have a documented disability. So these are some classic ways that we would look at how might the public sector or a partnership respond back. But I think more telling in putting a business case, a business perspective on this, is that the Federal Reserve Board has suggested, it has estimated that for every young adult in that age group that is not attached to education or employment represents a societal cost of $1 million per person over the course of their life.
Wow.
Timing was impeccable. So you take our 16,000 and then you look at the greater Washington region of maybe 61,000 according to the Brookings Institute, and nationwide multiple millions, roughly 1 in 7 young adults. So that to me is, I think, where the opportunities are, where investments can be made. Real quickly, to its great credit, the U.S. Congress has instituted what they're calling a Pay for Success project, where they're encouraging local governments, local workforce boards like ours, to work with employers, work with the private sector, and to be paid on the success of helping move that population into better circumstances. I'm pleased to announce that this local workforce board was the first in the nation to sign a contract with Fairfax County government, where we will work with the providers and pay them a bonus to move adjudicated young adults or young adults leaving foster care into a better circumstance in education or employment. That to me is, I think, where the national government's going to be going, and ideally funders as well, Aaron, in terms of how we might do things differently.
So with much credit to policymakers in Richmond, they've come to their senses and realized that there is an over-reliance on standardized testing. They say in Virginia, we've never met a standard nor a test we didn't like. So we're coming off that, and we're focusing more now on performance-based assessment, thankfully. With that comes an opportunity, and this is my pitch to all of you, and I'm very impressed and intrigued by your comments. There is something out there now called the profile of a graduate. Beginning with the incoming 9th grade class, things will look very different for these kids. Again, not so much reliance on SOL testing, but more of a reliance on the 5 C's. And I had to write them down because I always remember 4 and I can't remember the 5. Communication, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and citizenship. This fits in very nicely to what we're doing at Manassas Park High School. We have a program called COMPASS, which stands for Creative Opportunities at Manassas Park to Achieve Student Success. There's more of an emphasis now on real-world experiences. And to that end, we've developed a program that will kick off next year. We have a lot of 18-year-old kids coming to our schools. 18-year-old kids who have no credits. Coming from another country, maybe they haven't been in school for 4 or 5 years, but boy, do they have a work ethic. So what we want to do is to capitalize on those overage kids who want to succeed, whose parents want them to succeed, to do something we think would be very special for them. I know there's always been a concern about having internships where you're taking kids in who are underage. Here's an opportunity with Profile of a Graduate and Manassas Park Schools to take 18-year-old kids now. We have them on half-day schedules because of a creative schedule that we run called the 4x4, where it's like college. They take 4 classes in the fall and 4 in the spring. We're going to set some opportunities up where we can have extended periods of time for these kids to be with you, and we'll tie it to their academic program. Now, if you can't reach out to me in Manassas Park, I understand that. All schools will be faced with that challenge. We can just make it happen a little bit quicker because we're smaller, and I am the PIO, the bus director, and I'm the red tape, as they say. So that's a pitch for the future. I have lots of cards. If you want to talk, let's talk.
Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience? Okay, great. Let's open it up for some questions. I think I see a hand up over here.
Hello.
Great.
Hi. Hi. My name is Lauren Unger, and I'm a job coach for Fairfax County Community Service Board. And I want to thank you all for coming and talking. Everything has been so informative. My question to you is, since Virginia is an employment-first state, how do you think supported employment could tie into some of the problems or the barriers that you're addressing as far as working with somebody individually to help them one-on-one achieve some of these outcomes that we want, where they complete their education and then they move into employment or they do an internship?
And I think the basis of your question is, what can Virginia do, or what can we do?
Yeah, or what's your understanding of how supported employment can help address some of the things that you're talking about?
Well, I think that's a kind of a two ways to look at that. One is, how do we encourage the employer or an employer to create work sites to allow a placement? And I think in your example would be someone with a disability that might need some supportive employment efforts as well.
Sure. This Community Service Board of Fairfax County also helps people with mental illness or substance use disorders or just general Fairfax County residents. They'll help them one-on-one to gain employment. And so
Right.
It just feels like it kind of is in line with everything that you're talking about.
Right. So I guess, and I would even say our organization, SkillSource, we're a ticket to work employment network. So we're helping adults with who are receiving SSI or SSDI. They are receiving some federal benefits. And I have to say that they want to work. They want to find employment. They might have some supportive needs. Many of them, if they were on disability insurance, they were already working prior. And how do we help them reintegrate back into the workplace? I mean, even if it's starting out in a less in a less sophisticated role than they were before. I think it gets into employer engagement. I think it gets into how to incentivize the worker, him or herself. There's a variety of ways, but I will say this, for those, as you get to know our business, it's heavily regulated, probably on the CSP side as well as on our side, how we can spend federal and state and local dollars and how best then to incentivize the employer and the worker alike. I'm sure we could talk more offline that I could probably learn from you too.
Okay, thank you.
Time for one more? Okay, one more. Great.
Hi, my name is Mary Brown. I'm the director of DC Promise Neighborhood Initiative, and totally love the work that Ms. Copeland has been doing in this region, lifting the veil off of all the isms vis-a-vis the philanthropic community. I want to contextualize my inquiry. I've pulled together actually a group of elders in the community, and the Kenilworth Parkside community looks very much, well, it's African American, but I'm very much like you, David, where I'm in the mix with absolutely everything. And I pulled together elders, I pulled together youth from the community and parents, and I asked them about equity. It went over their heads. They didn't quite get it. And then as I began to drill down, and I pulled out the exact diagram, Ms. Copeland, with, okay, well, this is equality and this is equity. And one of the elders said, well, hell, why we got a fence? I don't want the fence. You know, why we got a fence here? Why we got a... And then some of the students who at the time, they were celebrating Kwanzaa, they said for them, it's kujichagulia, which in Swahili means agency, the ability to name ourselves and direct our paths and to have the wherewithal to move ourselves in the right direction. The question I have to you, is the conversation of equity becoming inequitable? Is the conversation of equity becoming a bit elitist? If so, what are we doing to ensure that, as you brought out, Mr. McDade, that we're working from the inside out so that the children and families, like the children and families you work with, David, that are actually a part of this movement? So it's a two-part question.
So just to start the conversation, thank you for the question. So we certainly recognize that the philanthropic community is a pretty ivory tower elitist community. So as we are looking at how do you define racial equity, we are going into communities. So we will be having community conversations with both community leaders and with residents of the communities to define what they think a racially equitable region would look like. We've had the first one in Montgomery County. We're in the process of planning one for this region, for Fairfax County. And so the intent, I do think though, Mary, that it is true that we don't go through most of us don't go through our everyday worlds thinking about equity or thinking about equality. So part of our responsibility is to educate and to help people to understand the level of inequity and inequality. We took as one of the guiding principles for our work a quote from John Gardner, who founded the independent sector, and he said, the first step in leadership is not action, it's understanding. So I think that we do have a responsibility to help people who have been kind of inundated with messages that suggest a certain reality, that perhaps that reality is not real.
I think we're out of time, but I am really glad that we ended on that point, because we touched upon this not too long ago when I first met with Eileen and a few others, talking about the role of philanthropy. And a very smart woman on our panel, Melody Barnes, said that there is a sentiment in the community where philanthropy looks to invest that so far you have done nothing for us without us. And I think that's a really important acknowledgement of being intentional in terms of working with communities, speaking with communities, engaging communities as part of the solution. That, I think we're on the verge of a tipping point, and I would certainly encourage everybody to think about that as you go back into your own worlds. So I think that's it. And I just want to thank this amazing panel, and thank you to everybody for coming, for listening to this talk.